How power becomes ownership. Every empire begins with a claim, not of land, but of control. Control over trade, control over resources, control over people. This is the story of every historical monopoly, from the merchants of salt to the barons of oil. It's not about economics, it's about obsession. The hunger to own not just wealth, but the right to decide who gets to have it. In this video, you'll see how historical monopolies shaped the world, how they rose, ruled, collapsed, and reborn in new disguises. Every era had one, and every time it changed the fate of millions. How salt became the first historical monopoly. Before gold, before oil, there was salt. A mineral so simple yet vital enough to start wars. Salt was life. It preserved food, healed wounds, and sustained armies. And whoever controlled it controlled survival itself. Ancient rulers understood this early. From China's emperors to Rome's Caesars, salt taxes funded entire empires. The word salary comes from sal, meaning salt, because soldiers were literally paid in it. This was the first historical monopoly, not born from greed, but necessity. But like all monopolies, once survival turned into power, fairness evaporated. Peasants paid, kings collected. And when that control grew unbearable, revolutions began. The French Revolution didn't just start over bread, it burned over salt. The same story, written centuries before oil and tech, began here. The moment when a resource became a weapon. How the East India Company perfected the historical monopoly. Fast forward to the 1600s. A company, not a country, ruled half the world. The British East India Company was the ultimate historical monopoly, a corporation with its own army, navy, and currency. It didn't just trade spices, it traded destiny. It conquered through contracts. It enslaved through tariffs. And it grew so powerful that even the British Crown feared it. This wasn't capitalism. It was corporate imperialism before the term existed. It wrote laws, executed rulers, and drained India's wealth in plain sight. At its peak, it managed more money than entire European kingdoms combined. The East India Company didn't just represent trade. It became the symbol of what happens when profit loses its humanity, when business becomes empire. And the echoes of that control still ripple through the modern global economy today. How oil barons created the modern historical monopoly. When the industrial age ignited, a new resource took the throne, oil, and with it came a new kind of empire. John D. Rockefeller built Standard Oil into a machine so efficient, so ruthless, it swallowed nearly every competitor in America. He didn't need soldiers. He used pricing wars, secret deals, and political influence. He bought railroads to crush rivals' transport costs. He bribed journalists, rewrote regulations, and made philanthropy a public shield. By the time the government stepped in, Standard Oil controlled over 90% of U.S. refining. It was the historical monopoly of modern industry, the model for every future corporate giant. When it was broken apart in 1911, something eerie happened. The baby companies it split into, Exxon, Chevron, Mobil, all grew again. Different names, same empire. That's the secret of monopolies. They don't die. They evolve. How the railroads built an empire of steel and control. In the 19th century, the world ran on rails. Railroads didn't just connect cities. They connected economies, politics, and class systems. Owning a railroad meant controlling time itself. Farmers paid whatever rates the railroads decided. Coal, timber, steel, all moved under monopoly rule. The historical monopoly of transportation became a chokehold on progress. Small towns withered if a line didn't pass through. Governments bowed to private tycoons who owned the arteries of the nation. It was a new kind of power, not visible on maps, but felt in every transaction. And once again, it ended the same way, with public outrage, broken trusts, and reforms that came too late. By the time control was wrestled back, the monopolist had already moved on into banking, oil, and manufacturing. You can destroy a company, but not the mindset that builds one. How telecommunications became a silent historical monopoly. In the 20th century, power stopped moving on rails and started flowing through wires. The telephone, radio, and later, the internet, all built on networks controlled by a few hands. AT&T was one such hand. For decades, it owned almost every phone line in the US. If you made a call, you used their system. If you wanted to innovate, you needed their permission. This historical monopoly didn't rule through force, but through infrastructure. It didn't need to threaten. It simply existed everywhere. When it was finally broken apart in the 1980s, it was hailed as a triumph of competition. But even today, the descendants of that breakup, Verizon, Comcast, AT&T, dominate our connections. You don't see the control, you live inside it. And in the digital world, control has a new name: convenience. How big tech became the modern face of historical monopolies. Today, we live under a new dynasty. Google controls what you know. Amazon controls what you buy. Apple controls how you connect. Meta controls what you believe. Each one is a modern historical monopoly, born not from physical power, but digital dependence. They don't conquer land, they conquer attention. Their armies are algorithms. Their territories are your screens. And their wealth doesn't just buy products, it buys culture. You don't fight them because you need them. And that's the perfect form of control, when submission feels like convenience. How governments secretly need monopolies to survive. You might think governments want to destroy monopolies, but history tells another story. Governments regulate, yes, but they also rely on monopolies. They use them for taxes, data, logistics, and control. In wars, monopolies become weapons. In peace, they become tools. Every historical monopoly that fell publicly often rose privately under government protection, because monopolies stabilize chaos until they don't. They're the paradox of civilization: too big to fail, too powerful to question, too useful to erase. And the people, generation after generation, end up paying the price of that dependency. The pattern hidden inside every historical monopoly. From salt to software, the pattern never changes. A resource emerges. Someone masters it. Competition fades. Power consolidates. Rebellion rises. And then, the system resets, but never truly reforms. Every historical monopoly leaves a blueprint for the next one. Each one learns from the last. Each one hides its control more elegantly. You're not watching the rise of monopolies. You're watching evolution in its most dangerous form: the evolution of control itself. How monopolies manipulate governments from the inside. Every monopoly begins outside the system, then learns how to rewrite it. The historical monopoly doesn't just influence power, it becomes part of it. When Rockefeller's Standard Oil grew too powerful, politicians tried to break it. But many of those politicians were funded by Rockefeller's allies. When the East India Company faced rebellion, the British Crown didn't destroy it, it absorbed it. And today, when tech giants face antitrust threats, they don't panic. They expand their lobbying budgets. You can't outlaw influence when it's built into the economy. That's the secret every monopoly learns. Control the rules, and you'll never break them. Democracy gives people the illusion of power. Monopolies write the fine print. How monopolies control culture through convenience. You don't need force to control people, just comfort. Every historical monopoly that lasted learned this truth. The railroads gave towns prosperity, so no one rebelled. Oil made life easier, so no one questioned the cost. Tech companies make existence frictionless, and that's why they win. Your entertainment, your shopping, your communication, all streamlined through a handful of systems. Convenience is the softest form of tyranny. It feels earned. It feels modern. But it isn't freedom. It's dependence wrapped in design. You stop wondering how things work. You just hope they keep working. And that's the moment the monopoly becomes invisible. Not by hiding, but by becoming everything. How media became a historical monopoly on truth. Before social media, information was ruled by ink and airwaves. A few conglomerates owned every major paper, every channel, every radio frequency. They decided what was news. They sculpted perception. And the historical monopoly on truth meant reality itself could be edited. Today, the monopoly has shifted, but it hasn't ended. Now algorithms decide what you see. Virality replaces credibility. Your feed is a curated illusion of choice, but choice without awareness isn't freedom. It's direction disguised as democracy. The old media moguls shaped nations. The new ones shape minds. How modern monopolies use data as the new oil. If the 20th century ran on oil, The 21st runs on information. Data is the new resource mined not from the earth, but from you. Every click, every scroll, every hesitation becomes a product. And the companies that collect it, they don't just know what you buy. They know what you'll want before you do. That's the new historical monopoly. Prediction. Google predicts your questions. Amazon predicts your desires. Meta predicts your emotions. When control of information turns into control of intention, free will starts to blur. And like oil barons of the past, the data barons own the pipelines of the future. Invisible, silent, and unchallenged. How monopolies redefine morality. Through money, every era redefines morality based on who has money. The church once sold salvation. Empires sold justice. Corporations now sell virtue. When a company controls the narrative of what's good, it creates a new kind of historical monopoly, the monopoly of morality. They fund causes, design hashtags, and sponsor revolutions, not to help, but to own the story. They donate billions, not as charity, but as armor. And the public, starved for heroes, crowns them saints. But power disguised as virtue is the oldest trick in history. And every time you celebrate a billionaire for giving back, remember, you can't give back what you took from everyone first. How nations became monopolies of power. Empires fell, but their methods never did. Modern nations are the ultimate historical monopolies. Centralized control over currency, trade, and fear. Borders are lines of control, not culture. Currencies are promises, not power. And the global economy isn't competition. It's collusion among monopolies with flags. You're told nations compete, but behind closed doors they synchronize. Regulations differ on paper, but the players remain the same. Every war, every treaty, every crisis hides an exchange of control. And in that silent network of agreements, the real map of power emerges, not drawn in geography, but in influence. How every monopoly eventually consumes itself. There's one rule even monopolies can't escape: entropy. Every system that grows too big begins to rot from within. Rome collapsed under corruption. The East India Company imploded under greed. Standard Oil fractured under its own success. It's the cycle of power: expansion, dominance, decay. But the lesson history refuses to learn is this: monopolies don't die. They reincarnate. The names change, the industries shift, but the blueprint remains the same. Every historical monopoly that ends only teaches the next one how to last longer, how you live inside the new monopoly, without realizing it. Right now, you live inside a monopoly that doesn't call itself one. Your digital life runs on platforms owned by a few global entities. Your money moves through banks that merge faster than they fail. Your opinions form in feeds run by unseen algorithms. And yet, you call it freedom. That's the brilliance of the modern historical monopoly. It doesn't need to rule nations. It rules narratives. It doesn't restrict your options. It makes you forget there were ever others. It's not the cage that keeps you inside. It's the comfort that keeps you still. How the cycle of monopoly always returns. Every civilization forgets. Every generation thinks it's different. But the same story keeps replaying. Control disguised as progress. You invent a new resource, a new system, a new promise. Someone masters it. Competition fades. And the cycle of monopoly begins again. Salt, spice, oil, data. It's always the same ghost wearing a new face. Every historical monopoly whispers the same prophecy: control everything, promise freedom, and when they finally fall, they leave behind a civilization built on their bones. The hidden empire never ends. So now you understand. The story of history isn't the story of people. It's the story of ownership. From ancient salt routes to silicon chips, every historical monopoly tells us who truly decides the fate of the world. Not kings, not presidents, but the few who learn how to turn necessity into dependence. And when you ask, who controls the world today? The answer is hauntingly familiar. It's not one company, not one empire. It's the idea itself. The belief that control is survival. And until that belief changes, history will keep repeating. Because monopolies don't die. They adapt. And right now, you are living inside one.